Let's talk about narratives, and in particular, one narrative that has been bringing itself up. I'm not going to talk about who said this and get into the full context of things, because there have been some attempts at atoning, so let's just talk about the narrative itself, not talk about who said it or anything. Elias Pettersson and his prickly personality. There has been this narrative that has gone on over the past few days, I believe, that has labeled Elias Pettersson as somebody who kinda acts a little bit like, let's just say for lack of a better term, a jerk. There's been some concern from some very specific people talking about his interview style, how he interviews with people, his sort of upfrontness and his bluntness when he's interviewed by people, and his frequency to point out the quality of the questions, how many questions there are, and how long the interviews have gone on. There's been this narrative that's been going on about how Elias Pettersson isn't necessarily that nice of a person when it comes to these interviews and the way he conducts himself in the public eye when he talks about stuff. And overall, there's been some really heavy criticism about this by some people. One of the quotes that people have been bringing up, but of course I'm not going to say who said it, talks about how maybe Pettersson shouldn't act like he's a Hall of Famer 40 games into his career. And comments like this have been made and people have been reacting to it. And to that, I just kind of wanted to give my own 2 cents on it. Honestly, I don't see anything wrong with it. First off, let's establish that the cookie-cutter answers of, yeah, we gotta play hard, get pucks in deep, it's a team game, we have to be better, we're here for each other, all that stuff, not everybody is gonna fall in line with that. And I think it's very prevalent in the NHL media to acknowledge that when somebody doesn't fall into the cookie-cutter responses, for example, maybe like an Ovechkin or a Brad Marchand or a PK Subban or an Elias Pettersson, it always gets pointed out because it's different from the norm. And everybody kind of knows that the cookie-cutter answers are basically the expectation here. When somebody interviews Jay Beagle on TSN 1040 or on Sportsnet 650, they're expecting the cookie-cutter answers. But when Elias Pettersson is getting interviewed, you don't necessarily expect that. And it makes sense, in a way. Pettersson grew up basically only doing hockey. He grew up in a small town in Sweden, Anji, and I'm not gonna proclaim that I pronounced that correctly. I'm pretty sure I didn't. But he grew up in this environment where basically all he did and all he cared about was hockey. And he conducted his interviews in Sweden in Swedish. He only really started speaking English regularly when he came over to Vancouver, because playing in Sweden, the teammates were mostly Swedish, the coaches were Swedish, the media was Swedish, so it's not like Pettersson had to force himself to speak English every single day. And there's no doubt in my mind that there's probably a little bit of English refinement that Pettersson has to go through whenever he speaks in English in the NHL today. And at the same time, Pettersson's been growing up basically only focused on hockey. And this media team in Vancouver is the team that basically ridiculed the Canucks for not picking Cody Glass or Gabe Vilardi. You remember the media when Pettersson was picked, right? People didn't like it. And a lot of people have been saying Pettersson's too small, he's not strong enough, he's not big enough, he's not going to be able to play in the NHL, he's not going to translate. There's been that narrative on him as well, basically for the entire part of a year. And now when Pettersson comes over to the same media that was basically kind of trashing him earlier, and they ask him over and over these repetitive and not really intellectual questions, of course, Pettersson is probably going to get a little fed up. And it's not like we should expect the cookie-cutter answers, because a lot of good old Ontario boys are probably going to suck it up and go with those cookie-cutter answers. But Pettersson doesn't see the value in that, and he's honest, which I like. I like the honesty, and I like the concern for the questions that he usually brings up. oh, that's a lot of questions, or he gives out the death stare, or he points out that the questions are kind of really dumb in a very satirical way. It's funny. It's entertaining to watch. And honestly, I don't think it says anything about him as a character in terms of if he's a nice person or not, but Pettersson is just a guy who cares about hockey. The media is not something that he puts all that much attention to. At least, that's what I feel. That's what I see, and that's what I read from watching Pettersson's interviews and listening to him on the radio. Honestly, you're fair to disagree, and if you want to, comment down below what you think, but that's just my 2 cents on it. Hope you guys enjoyed this Richard Blessings for Shows I Sang Gaming. I'm still really sick, by the way. I don't know if you can tell. And bye.